Hi, gang. The most serious grammatical error is sentence fragments. One reason it's serious is that most readers can spot the error even if they don't know what it's called. Unfortunately, they're often much more difficult to spot in our own writing because we believe that they're connected either to the sentence before them or the sentence after them, when really they aren't. I wanted to spend a few minutes reviewing what sentence fragments are and giving you some hints on how to spot them in your own writing. In order for a group of words to be a complete sentence, it must meet three criteria. In order for a group of words to be a complete sentence, it must have a subject. The subject of a sentence will always be a noun or a pronoun. Now, in order for a group of words to be a complete sentence, it must also have a verb. Now, there are two types of verbs. Some verbs, in fact, most verbs, indicate an action. Action verbs include words like walk, talk, sleep, think, and believe. But some verbs express a state of being. State of being verbs are usually forms of the verbs to be, to have, and to do. While these verbs can be used as helping verbs, they also may stand alone and not be followed by an action verb. Examples are Juan is a student, Maria has money, and Teresa does homework. Finally, a sentence must express a complete thought. In other words, if someone walks up to you in the hall and says only that word group, you can't feel like you're waiting for him or her to say more. Now, that's not to say that you might not want or need more information or wonder why someone would think you wanted the information that he or she gave you. But you won't be left feeling like the person walked away without finishing what he or she was thinking. For example, if someone walked up to you in the hall and said he slept, you might wonder who he was and why you should care if he slept or not. But on the other hand, if someone walked up to you and said, when I was a child, and walked away, you'd wonder what happened when that person was a child. Now, don't worry. There are some pretty clear clues as to when a word group doesn't express a complete thought, and we'll talk about those shortly. When examining your writing to identify fragments, you must read each sentence in your work by itself, separate from the sentence before it and the sentence after it. Read from one period to the next period. Let me repeat that. You have to read every sentence separately, without reading it as if it were connected to the sentence before it or the sentence after that. You have to read from one period to the next period. Okay, now when you're doing that, you will see that you have written words into groups. Ask yourself what the verb is in the word group that you have formatted as a sentence. What action is taking place? If there's no action, is there a form of to be, to have, or to do? Now, if there's no action word and there aren't any forms of to be, to have, or to do, the word group doesn't have a verb, so it's a fragment. Want to mention a couple of special notes about verbs, because sometimes some words that look like verbs aren't really functioning as verbs in that word group. First, verbs preceded by the word to are not the verb of the sentence. They're infinitives. They don't function as verbs in the sentence. Now, it's easy to see why if we consider a really short sentence. Does the sentence I to be make any sense? Well, no, of course not. To express that idea, we'd say I am. But notice that the word am in I am is not preceded by the word to. Now, on the other hand, if we look at the sentence I want to be nice, Well, that sentence makes sense because there is another verb in this sentence. Want. And want is the verb of the sentence. To be is not. No word ending in ing that is not preceded by helping verbs is the verb of the sentence. In fact, most of the time, those words don't function as verbs at all. Usually, they function as nouns. For example, in the sentence, Corinne loves singing, the verb is loves. By the same token, in the sentence, Corinne is singing, the verb is singing. But in that case, notice that singing is preceded by the helping verb is. But on the other hand, the sentence, singing brings beauty to the world, the verb is brings. And in that sentence, singing actually functions as a noun and is the subject of the sentence. Now, because nouns can perform several functions in a sentence, you can't assume that a word group has a subject just because there's a noun or a pronoun in it. Now, it's much easier to identify the subject of a sentence if you find the verb first. And once you've found the verb, ask yourself who or what is performing that action, or who or what is, has, or does something. The answer is the subject of the sentence. But now pay attention to this. The answer and the subject must appear in that word group, not in the sentence before it or in the sentence after it. Let's look at an example. In the sentence, Joanne went to school, we first look for the verb. Went is an action word, so it's the verb. Now we ask ourselves who or what went. The answer is Joanne, and since Joanne appears in that word group, it's the subject. Now, once we know that a word group has a subject and a verb, we need to determine whether it expresses a complete thought. Now, we've already discussed the method of asking yourself whether you would think a person who says only that word group to you would leave you feeling like he or she didn't finish what he or she started. But if you find that confusing, there's another way to decide if a word group expresses a complete thought. Now, I provided you with a handout that's titled Lists of Words Important in Grammar. On that handout, find the list of subordinate conjunctions. Any word that begins with a subordinate conjunction is a dependent clause. A dependent clause cannot stand alone as a sentence. It is dependent on another clause. It has to be connected to an independent clause that is in the same sentence, not in the sentence before it or the sentence after it. Most sentence fragments result from writers reading a sentence as if it's connected to the sentence before or after it. That's why you need to look at each sentence in your work individually and separately from the sentence before and after it. Now, here's something important to note. Because the subject and verb in a dependent clause cannot be the subject and verb of the sentence, you should either mentally or actually physically cross out the verb and the subject in that word group. Then ask yourself if what is left over has a verb and a subject. Now, I know that sounds confusing, but let's look at an example and I think you'll see what I mean. Now, notice that this example includes two word groups that are formatted as sentences. The first one is, when Sarah goes to the park. The second one is, she likes to sit in the shade. Let's look at that first word group that's written as a sentence. It's when Sarah goes to the park. Now, looking at our list of subordinate conjunctions, we see that when is one of them. So we know that we need to cross off the verb and subject that's in that word group that begins with when. we see that the action verb is goes, and by asking ourselves who or what goes, we see that the subject is Sarah. Okay, so we cross the words Sarah and goes out of the word group. What we have left is went to the park. Went to the park. Now, is there a verb in that word group? No, there isn't. And that means that that word group can't be a sentence. And if it's formatted as a sentence, it's a fragment. But we can join those two word groups into one sentence separated by a comma. And now, when we connect that first word group to the one after it, we have a sentence that reads, when Sarah goes to the park, comma, she likes to sit in the shade. Now let's see what happens when we cross out the word goes and the word Sarah because it's in a dependent clause that begins with when. Well, what we have left is when to the park, she likes to sit in the shade. Is there an action word in that group that we have left over? Yes, likes is an action word. So we ask ourselves who or what likes. She likes. Now, since that sentence has both a verb and a subject, it does express a complete thought, and it is an actual sentence. Now, if you have problems understanding what the concept expresses a complete thought means, you can always use this very mechanical procedure to check it. And don't worry, in very short order, you'll begin to recognize the subordinate conjunctions that you use the most, and that's going to make it a lot easier because you won't have to always check that list. I hope this short video helps you identify sentence fragments in your writing. Keep in mind that this video is designed to add additional information to the material we studied on sentence fragments, not replace it. You need to study all assigned material in the course. But if you have any questions, all I want you to do is email me through Canvas because you know I want to help you any way I can. You just have to let me know what you need help with. Well, until we talk again, write your hearts out. But do something you love, too.